The jungle of the Philippines in 1945 had no mercy for anyone. By the spring of that year, after months of bitter fighting, the war that had once seemed distant had consumed every road, every village, every field. For the Japanese garrisons scattered across Luzon and the Visayas, hope had withered into nothing but whispers of reinforcements that never came. For civilians caught in the storm, women, children, the elderly, capture meant terror. In a clearing not far from the ruins of a sugar plantation, 4 Japanese women were herded forward under the eyes of American guards. Their wrists were bound, their faces pale under the sun. They wore remnants of nurses' uniforms, white blouses now grey with sweat and dirt, skirts torn at the hems, sandals fraying. To the Americans they looked fragile, almost spectral. But to the women themselves every step was heavy with dread. Whispers had spread even before capture. The Americans kill prisoners, women fare worse. These were not fantasies but rumours carried on the terrified voices of retreating soldiers. The women expected the worst. One clutched a rosary hidden in her pocket, though her voice trembled when she prayed. Another whispered to her younger sister, "When it comes, close your eyes. Do not beg. Just go quickly." They were marched into a camp ringed with barbed wire. Inside, rows of American prisoners lay on mats, gaunt and wasted. The sight startled the women. They had been told Americans were pampered, overflowing with supplies. Yet here were men reduced to skin and bone. Around them, US soldiers moved with quiet efficiency, carrying stretchers, spooning broth, wiping brows slick with fever. The camp reeked of sweat, infection, and exhaustion. The Japanese women were shoved into a corner, left to sit on the hard ground while the guards conferred. Every rifle in sight reminded them that their lives balanced on a threat. They expected interrogation, perhaps public humiliation, perhaps worse. But as the hours passed, none of that came. They were given water, later a bowl of rice. The simple act of eating in front of their captors unsettled them more than hunger ever had. On the second evening, as the tropical sky faded into deep violet, the sound of a bell echoed faintly across the camp. The women froze. A bell, deep, steady, unmistakable. They had not heard such a sound since their childhood villages, before the war swallowed everything. The guards began assembling men, leading them toward a small wooden chapel on the edge of the camp. Lantern light flickered inside, spilling golden threads onto the dirt path. An American officer appeared, flanked by the interpreter. His voice was clipped, commanding, yet the words that came through the translator left the women stunned. "Tomorrow is Sunday. You will attend Mass." At first, none of them moved. Attend Mass? The idea was absurd. They had expected to be kept behind wire, punished, humiliated. Instead, they were being told they would walk into a church, sit under the same roof as their captors, and join in a ritual they thought forever closed to them. One woman, 24-year-old Hana, whispered hoarsely, "They mock us. This is a trick." Her younger sister clutched her arm and shook her head, unable to form words. The officer repeated the order. Tomorrow they would walk to the chapel. No chains, no rifles pressed to their backs, though guards would accompany them. They were to sit, watch, listen. When the officer left, silence settled heavy around the group. Each woman tried to make sense of what she had heard. Was it deception? A cruel game before execution? Or was it real? That night, none of them slept. They lay awake, listening to the steady chorus of jungle insects, the distant coughs of prisoners, the soft rhythm of guards' boots in the mud. The promise of Mass seemed unreal, almost cruel in its strangeness. One woman whispered into the dark, "If they pray with us, what does it mean? Are we not enemies?" Dawn came with pale light cutting through the palm trees. Guards arrived, but their rifles were lowered. The women were ordered to stand. Their ropes had been removed days earlier. Instead, they were told simply to walk. The path wound through what remained of the plantation, past rows of withered cane and the husks of burned-out trucks. At the chapel, villagers, American soldiers, and prisoners filed inside. The wooden benches creaked under their weight. Candles flickered against the walls. A cross stood at the front, its simple wood polished by hands that had refused to abandon faith even amid war. The Japanese women hesitated at the threshold, unsure if they were stepping into mercy or mockery. Then, almost gently, an American chaplain gestured for them to enter. His words were soft, the translator repeating them. "You are welcome here." They walked inside. The air smelled of wax and pine. An American nurse shifted to make space on the bench. Hana's sister sat down, her body trembling as though every movement might shatter her. Around them, voices murmured prayers in English. The chaplain began, his voice rising steady, words foreign yet strangely familiar. For the women, it was like stepping into another world. The enemy they had been taught to fear bowed their heads, folded their hands, and spoke words of peace. Hymns rose, their melodies hauntingly close to those the women remembered from childhood. Tears welled in Hana's eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. She could not show weakness, and yet the sound tore through his walls. Later she would write, hidden in a scrap of notebook she carried, "We thought capture meant death. Instead they gave us candles and song. I do not understand it. Perhaps I never will." When the service ended, the women lingered. They stared at the candles, afraid the moment would vanish once they stepped outside. For an hour, they had not been prisoners, not enemies, simply women surrounded by voices praying for something larger than war. As they left the chapel, the air was thick with silence. No rifles barked, no jeers followed, only the sound of the bell tolling across the camp, carrying its strange message into a world still burning. The days after that first mass moved strangely, like time itself had been unsettled. For Hana and the other women, captivity still meant hunger, fear, and the constant awareness of rifles within reach. Yet the memory of that chapel clung to them like the scent of candle wax on their clothes. At night in the barracks, they whispered about it, careful to keep their voices low. One woman said it must have been staged, propaganda to humiliate them. Another shook her head. If it was a show, why give us real bread? Why let us hear their prayers? The question lingered with no answer. Each morning, the routine of the camp returned. They swept, carried water, tended to basic chores assigned by the guards. None of it erased the uncertainty that clung to them. They were still captives, still enemy women in a foreign war, but the sharp edge of terror dulled. 3 days later, the bell tolled again. The guards approached, this time less brusque. Through the interpreter came the words, "You will attend again." Hana's breath caught in her throat. Her sister squeezed her hand. Fear battled curiosity as they walked once more along the path, through withered cane and past rusting machinery, to the small wooden chapel. This time the space was even more crowded. Prisoners shuffled in with hollow eyes. American soldiers filled the benches, some with bandaged arms or slings. Villagers trickled in too, Filipino families whose homes had been shattered by the war. The mixture of faces startled the women. Here, under one roof, were victors and victims, captors and captives. The chaplain began again. His words in English carried through the humid air, the interpreter trailing behind in halting Japanese. Forgiveness, peace, a dawn beyond the fire. The women understood fragments, but the tone itself seemed to carry meaning. When the hymn began, Hana froze. The melody was unmistakable. Silent Night. She had sung it as a child in her grandmother's tiny church before the war stripped such things from their lives. To hear it now, in the voices of her enemies, was unbearable in its beauty. She pressed her hands to her face, hiding tears she could not stop. One of the American nurses sitting nearby noticed. She shifted, placing a folded cloth gently in Hana's lap. No words, just a gesture. Hannah clutched it tightly, ashamed of her tears but unable to resist the kindness. Afterward, as they filed out, a child from the nearby village reached up and offered Hannah a candle stub. She stared at it, unsure whether to accept. The child's eyes were wide, innocent, unclouded by war. Slowly, Hannah took the candle, her fingers trembling. The small flame had burned out, but its memory seemed to glow against her skin. Back in the barracks that night, Hannah Scribb led into her hidden scrap of notebook. Today I held a candle from a child of our enemy. It weighed less than a feather, but it felt heavier than my heart. I do not know what to call this, mercy or madness. Suspicion still lingered. One guard spat near their feet when they passed, muttering words they could not understand, but whose venom was clear. Another looked at them with eyes full of hate, his brother lost in a battle against Japanese troops. Mercy did not erase grief. Yet even those guards did not bar them from the chapel. The women wrestled with their feelings in silence. To be allowed into prayer with their captors unsettled everything they had been taught. Back home they had heard broadcasts declaring Americans were barbarians without souls. But in the flicker of candles, those same Americans bowed their heads and whispered hymns older than war. One evening, an American officer entered the barracks carrying a small parcel. He set it down and left without a word. Inside were scraps of cloth, clean, white, folded neatly. Bandages. Through the interpreter came the explanation, "For you, if you wish to tend to the sick." At first, the women hesitated. Was this another test? But the sight of the gaunt American prisoners sprawled across the camp silenced their doubts. That night, they cleaned wounds, wiped brows, and whispered prayers not in English, not in Japanese, but in the universal rhythm of care. The guards watched, but did not interfere. For Hannah, the act was more shattering than the chapel. Tending the wounds of enemies had once seemed impossible, yet as she pressed cloth to a fevered brow, she realized that the body beneath her hands could have belonged to anyone, brother, father, friend. Her sister whispered as they lay down later, "I thought they would kill us. Instead they let us pray. Now they let us heal. What do we call this?" Hannah stared into the dark. "Perhaps we call it survival, or perhaps forgiveness." In the weeks that followed, the pattern deepened. Sundays meant Mass. Evenings sometimes brought small acts of unexpected kindness, a crust of bread, a candle stub, a wordless nod from a nurse. The women remained prisoners, yet within the walls of the chapel they were no longer defined only by chains. Rumors of war's end began to filter into the camp, whispers of bombs, of cities turned to fire. The women sat stunned, unable to imagine the homeland they remembered reduced to rubble. They did not know if their families were alive. Yet, in the chapel, hymns rose regardless, fragile threads of sound that seemed to hold back despair. Hannah wrote again in her scrap of notebook, "They sing the same words we once sang in our villages. They kneel before the same altar. If the enemy prays as we pray, then who is the enemy?" The rains came in June, heavy and unrelenting, drumming against the tin roofs of the barracks until the air itself seemed drowned. The camp reeked of damp wood, wet uniforms, and the sour smell of sickness that never truly left. Yet every Sunday the bell still tolled. No storm silenced it. The women were marched once more to the small chapel, their steps sinking into the mud, their hearts carrying the strange weight of expectation. By now, the benches no longer felt forbidden. The Americans had grown used to their presence, though not all welcomed it. Some still stared with hard eyes, unable to forget the battles that had taken brothers and friends. But others nodded, even shifted to make space. The women had learned to sit quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered, blending into the rhythm of prayers not meant for them, yet somehow carrying them too. One evening, during a hymn, Hannah's sister dared to let her voice join, soft, trembling, nearly lost beneath the swell of English words. A guard glanced at her but did not silence her. The melody rose, imperfect yet whole, and Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. To hear her sister's voice, once reserved only for childhood songs, weave into the chorus of their captors was almost too much to bear. Outside the chapel, however, war still raged. Rumors thickened like smoke. Tokyo bombed, Osaka burning, families scattered, perhaps gone. The women sat in silence at night, clutching rosaries or scraps of paper, whispering names of loved ones into the dark as if sound itself could carry across oceans. Then came August. The whispers turned into declarations. A new kind of bomb had fallen, one that erased entire cities in a single flash. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The women sat stunned, unable to imagine such destruction. Hannah pressed her hands to her face, whispering, "My family. Are they ash now?" None of them answered. There were no words. Days later, the interpreter entered the barracks with the words that silenced everything. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. The women sat in stunned silence. Surrender was unthinkable, forbidden. They had been raised to believe death was better. And yet here it was, final, undeniable. Their empire had fallen. What followed was stranger still. Instead of punishment, instead of mockery, the Americans gathered the women and spoke through the interpreter. "You will be released, you will go home. Many of you prayed with us, worked beside us. That will be remembered." Hannah felt her knees weaken. Released? Home? She had not let herself dream of such a word. For months she had lived only by the measure of each dawn, expecting it to be her last. Now she was told she would see her homeland again. The farewell was quiet but unforgettable. As they prepared to leave, one American nurse pressed something into Hannah's hands, a folded scrap of cloth, the same one she had once offered during tears in the chapel. "Keep it," the interpreter translated softly. Hannah bowed deeply, unable to speak. The fabric clutched against her chest. Another soldier, young and gaunt from his own captivity, approached Hannah's sister. He fumbled with a small wooden cross carved from scrap. "For you," he said in halting Japanese, words practiced yet clumsy. She accepted, tears streaming freely. When the women finally stepped beyond the barbed wire, the chapel bell tolled behind them. Its sound lingered long after the camp disappeared from sight, as if carrying a message they could not yet name. Years later, Hannah would sit in a quiet Tokyo neighborhood, the city rebuilt but scarred, and tell her children the story. She would describe the hunger, the fear, the endless march of war. But she would also describe the chapel, the candles, the hymns, the enemies who knelt beside them, not with rifles but with folded hands. In her diary, preserved in faded ink, she had written, "We thought capture meant death. Instead, they gave us mass. We thought enemies could not pray together. Instead, they sang our childhood songs. History will remember the bombs, the battles, the ruins. But I will remember the bell that tolled for both sides, and the mercy that turned prisoners into worshippers." The legacy of that memory endured, fragile yet unbroken. The war had taken everything, families, cities, faith in leaders. Yet in one small chapel, in the flicker of candlelight, it had given something back. Proof that even in the darkest hours, humanity could rise above vengeance. And so, decades later, when Hannah's grandchildren asked her what war had taught her, she did not speak of death. She spoke of the night when, as a prisoner, she sat beside her captors and sang the same hymn. "That," she whispered, "was the truest victory I ever knew."